Hey everybody, welcome back to another 10-minute Marvel video. Yes, you are getting two today. I'm Petter, and the first video is already out. Check that one out. But this one, I wanted to cover one of the topics that we're going to be covering on this next episode of 10-Minute Marvel, and that's going to be a potential Fantastic Four X-Men director. This has come out this week. I believe it was the Jeff Snyder, who had this reported first as a rumor, where that Marvel is considering Jake Schreier as the director for X-Men, or at least the first X-Men project. Now, you might be like, oh, that name seems familiar. Where have I heard it recently? Well, Jake Schreier is the director of Thunderbolts Is, or its new name, potentially. We'll see if Marvel officially changes that name. But I think that this is an interesting choice, and one that I actually can get behind quite well. So, I will say, if you haven't seen Thunderbolts, I'm gonna maybe spoil some of Thunderbolts coming up here to explain why I think it works. The big thing for me is that an X-Men movie should have emotional weight to it. You can't just have an X-Men team where it's just purely heroic actions. The X-Men always are dealing with the fact that they are different, that they are not Homo sapiens, but Homo superiors. At least that's kind of the terminology that they use. And with that comes, of course, people who don't like that. There are Homo sapiens who are like, no, you guys are mutants, you're freaks, you shouldn't be. Therefore, we're going to persecute you. We're going to make your life hard. We're going to ostracize and other you. That is the biggest storyline constantly through the X-Men comics. That always exists there. And along with that, you also generally have a storyline of, and this takes form in different ways and between different groups of, you have your good mutants and your bad mutants, and how you handle these situations and expect people to react to you, like how you want to handle humanity and humanity's dislike of you really sets up a lot of the X-Men conflict between those two things. Now, both of those are really kind of emotionally driven elements because they stem from the same thing, but how do you not let your frustration and anger at humanity ostracizing you push you over the edge? And that internal struggle, I think, is something that should be highlighted and focused in these films. So what does that have to do with Jake Schreier? Well, he just did Thunderbolts, as I said. And Thunderbolts isn't a very emotional story. It really has to do with all these characters facing two different things. The first being this idea that we're alone. Val, and this is where spoilers are going to come in, Val has separated all her different agents, and they are working separately doing her work. So your Taskmaster, Ghost, Elena, and John Walker, U.S. Agent, they're all doing her work, but they're all doing it separately from each other. She's keeping everything separate and apart, and because of that, they all feel separated. They feel like they don't have anybody with them, and they kind of feel like they are in dark places. And this is then doubly put up with Void and Bob as well. And we really get to spend time with those characters in feeling like they aren't wanted necessarily, and feeling that they are left alone and nobody can really see what they're going through. And it tells a very impactful story. So, that, to me, is the big reason why I think Jake Schreier could be such a good director. He was able to bring out that emotional tone in this film while still giving us very good action and some pretty cool, unique scenes. The one question I do have, though, is, for the most part, now Sentry, Bob, Void, does fly some and he shows off various powers, but for the most part, the powers of the characters are we punch stuff. Even Ghost, who fades in, or who like phases in and out, punches stuff as well, kind of for her combat. It's no magical powers, there's no lightning, anything like that. So how is he going to handle maybe combat in different ways? I think certainly some of the fighters definitely are going to be more physical still. Like a Gambit or a Rogue, where they're punching people or throwing cards, energizing stuff. That's all still very physical in terms of what's being done. But how do you make sure that you have a strong Cyclops with the concussive blast from his eyes? Or Storm? How are you going to integrate those elements into an X-Men movie to really show off an interesting and unique combat style? Now, I think we've seen some things that work quite well. For example, in the Thor movies, we get to see lightning powers work well. With magic and Doctor Strange, I think we've seen some really good things there. But then we've also had movies where we potentially had this really interesting power combo set up in the Marvels. And while we got some decent interaction with them all switching places, that didn't really build to a great fight scene like it should have. Just because I think there are some things that are harder and trickier to do. And that being one of them. It's trickier to have some of these more unique powers work really well. And so that's going to be the big thing that if Jake Schreier gets an X-Men film that I'm going to be curious about. How does he create combat sequences, fights, choreographed fights, and obviously there's like a fight choreographer who would be doing this, but how can they create those interactions so they look really good and interesting and characters can really show off their unique powers? But let me know your thoughts on this rumor in the comment section down below. Have you seen Thunderbolts Asterix yet? And if so, what do you think of Jake Schreier potentially doing an X-Men movie? Or let me know based off of the other work that Jake Schreier has done as well. And if you enjoy this content, check out the other videos here on the channel. Like I said, there's a new one that came out already today, just a few minutes ago, where it was Fantastic Four trading cards. And if you want to really dive into this topic, Greg and I are going to be talking about, well, the 10-year plan for the X-Men that Kevin Feige talked about, as well as this news around the X-Men on this upcoming 10-Minute Marvel podcast. You can find the podcast here on YouTube. Click onto the channel, subscribe if you haven't already. Click that notification bell to know when new videos come out, and then click on the podcast tab. Or you can search for 10 Minute Marvel wherever you get your friendly neighborhood podcast from. But with that, we'll see you next time.